Hi, everyone. Buenas noches, good evening, or buenas tardes, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. We are so excited that you have joined us for the fourth in a series of webinars that we at the New York State Association of Independent Schools, or NYSAIS for short, have organized to support preparation for the 33rd annual Job Fair to Promote Diversity, which will be held virtually on Saturday, February 26th from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. My name is Liz Fernández, and I am one of the team members that puts together the NYSAIS Job Fair, and I'm also a candidate. Years ago, this is how I ended up in independent schools, and so it's a very important experience for our schools and ultimately for our kids and our families. Tonight's topic is the successful transition from higher ed, university space, the charter, public, parochial schools to independent schools. And I've invited 4 colleagues who work at different kinds of schools in New York, and I'll be asking them some questions. I'm also going to invite those of you that are viewing live to send questions using the chat feature directly to me. And I will, since I know the queue of questions, I will ask your questions if they are not questions I already have ready to go. And you can do that throughout. If you are lucky enough to watch this recording, if you have any follow-up questions, please do reach out, jobfair@nysais.org. That is the email address, and I promise you I will respond. I'm here to help and support you in your process. And with that, I'm going to invite my colleagues and friends this evening to introduce themselves. I'm going to ask Elise to go first, then Tim, then Brenda, and then Alec. And I'm going to ask you to please introduce yourself. Where do you work? In what capacity and what role? For how long? And what type of prior professional location did you transition from? What type of prior educational institution did you transition from? So remember your order and let's go. Let's have a great time. I look forward to hearing about your individual stories.
Thank you, Liz. Hi, everyone. My name is Elise Battle, and I'm currently working at Trinity School. I'm an upper school learning specialist and equity and inclusion coordinator. This is my 3rd year at Trinity, but prior to working at Trinity, I worked at Georgetown Day School in Washington, D.C. for 5 years, and I transitioned to that independent school from Arlington Public Schools.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Garcia. I'm the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Coordinator at Fieldston Lower School in the Bronx. So I'm working specifically with the elementary age children and staff. Before that, I worked in charter schools in Brooklyn at 2 separate networks for about 7 years. Oh, and I just want to name my pronouns are he, him, his.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alec Milton. He, him, his pronouns as well. I work actually also at Trinity School. I'm one of the associate directors of college counseling in the upper school, obviously. I've been here for about 7 years now, and I transitioned from the university side. So I worked in higher education administration for almost 15 years. But prior to that, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I come back to independent school life because I spent about 8 years as an independent school teacher, then went off to higher ed, and then came back as sort of a quasi teacher and administrator.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Brenda Daniels. I serve as the 4th through 6th grade learning specialist at the town school. This is my 4th year in the role, and prior to joining town, I was in the charter school world for about 10 years at a couple of different networks.
Terrific. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much. So I'm super curious for you to reflect on this process that you've just been through, whether recently or several years ago, talk a little bit about your professional journey. What made you consider independent schools? And feel free to, share a brief story or something that helps our audience understand how you ended up where you currently are. I'm going to ask Brenda, please go first, and then Tim, Elise, and then Alec.
Sure. So I'm actually a graduate of an independent school. I actually attended Trinity School, so it's good to see some faces of some people of color at Trinity School. That's really great. I was in public charter for a little while, about 13 years, and I decided that I wanted to go back to independent school. There was something very different about independent school, just the fact that it's its own entity in charge of curriculum. That was my initial draw to charter schools, actually, the fact that, we could do something very different. And then things changed a little bit. There was quite a focus on testing, and I wanted to go back to what I believe is a high quality education, which isn't necessarily attached to standardized testing.
Thank you for sharing that. So I taught for 7 years at charter schools. I was a history teacher, an ELA teacher, a writing teacher, every grade, 5 through 8, every subject, 5 through 8. And on the side, I was the diversity coordinator, which meant I was training my staff, I was leading PDs. And I was doing that before I had started working at charter networks. It was important to me to create spaces. I often was in school feeling like I didn't have spaces myself. And so it was just an important passion for me, but it always felt like I was working against institutional wants and needs. It felt like I was constantly doing it on the side. And it just didn't feel like I was grasping or getting that passion in the way I wanted my career to go. And honestly, I was searching for DEI roles that are more of a career for about 4 years. And I couldn't find much of anything until, last summer, where America decided we need these roles in our capitalistic institutions, right? We need these roles to exist. And honestly, I had a mentor who said, consider joining independent day schools. And when I was looking at them, I was just checking to see if I am doing DEI work at an independent day school, am I doing it alone? And one of the reasons I was really drawn to ethical culture Fieldston School was because there was a team. There's a DEI coordinator at every single division. And instantly from the interview, I felt like I had connections that I could make. I had connections I could solidify, and I could work with a group of people who had similar goals and values. And so that's how I sort of ended up here. And for everyone, this is my first year. I've been at Fieldston for, I guess it's 5 months now, 6 months now, something around that sort. And so, yeah, that transition was about the career path that I wanted and the resources that I needed to have to get there.
Thank you. So for me, I was introduced to public schools given my graduate program and the connection for my practicum year. And so that was really all I was used to. And very similar to Brenda, being a special education teacher, a lot of the work you do is teaching towards standardized testing. And even though students might have an individualized education program or plan, you still have to keep those things in mind when creating your curriculum. And so when I was working in Arlington Public Schools in Virginia, there just seemed to be so much more of an emphasis on scores and standardized testing that I really didn't have as much flexibility as I wanted when thinking about ways to be successful or differentiating curriculum for my students. And so I started thinking about what other institutions or programs or schools had to offer. And a friend of mine who had transferred from public schools said, you might want to consider independent. There's still a learning specialist component to it. You're still working with students who have identified learning disabilities with accommodations, but there's a little bit more flexibility and creativity in terms of what you can do to make sure that students have equitable practices, are able to access the curriculum. And so that was something that really piqued my interest. And then starting at Georgetown Day School, which was known for being one of the first schools to integrate, I thought that that was a real powerful moment for me to be able to collaborate in that space as a woman of color, and then to also reach students that look like me and affirmed with me so that they could feel successful and also be able to have just an experience that was organic and natural with someone that reflected like themselves. So that was really how I got into the independent school world. And then I'm originally from New York. So in thinking about next steps, it just seemed right for me to come full circle back here. And I learned about Trinity and everything that it stood for. And I thought to myself, you know, as the work that I was doing at GDS, I really wanted to come and bring that there. And that was great as a learning specialist, but ultimately how I got connected with our Director of Equity and Inclusion and how I became an Equity and Inclusion Coordinator for our upper school, which I also agree has a nice component too, because students are allowed to see me in another role that's not just academically related, which allows for us to foster organic relationships and for them to be more transparent during our time together. So that's how my story and my journey, how I got into independent school.
Hi again, everyone. So I too am an independent school grad, kind of bounced around public school, Catholic school, and then my mom shipped me away to boarding school. And so I did that for a couple of years. After college, I was looking to take a year of a break from college and work on applying to PhD programs and things like that. And so I went back to my high school alma mater and I taught there for a year, right? So it was, you know, a good situation, help run a dorm, 3 square a day, and, you know, living up in the country. And so I fell in love with teaching because that's essentially what I was going to go get my PhD in philosophy, and fell in love with that. Not many public schools have, you know, philosophy. And so it was just that right fit of, you know, all of the humanities that independent schools are known to do. So I kind of jumped into that. I taught up there in the Hudson Valley for a couple more years, moved down into the city, taught here for a few more years. And then I went to do the Klingenstein program up at Columbia University. And so while I was doing that, I met Wendy Kopp at the time, who's running Teach for America, and sort of got a little bit interested in that. And then I went to work for Teach for America for a year in their national office. And that actually happened to be the year of 9/11. And so that was a hard year. It was my first time working, not being on a school campus or in a school community, even though it was an education organization. And so I kind of missed that kind of familial feel of what it's like to work alongside teachers and see kids running around the building all the time. So I really missed that. But the part of Teach for America that, and I kind of love and believe in their mission, and I wanted to support that. But the part of the job that I found the most intriguing was, you know, Wendy had a rule that if you were a teacher, you had to do admissions for the teaching corps. And so they shipped me off to Maine, to Louisiana, to interview college students who wanted to join Teach for America. And so, you know, did a little bit of travel, talked about the organization, interviewed people. It was like a whole process. And one of my classmates in my grad program, who was doing his internship in the admissions office at Columbia, said, well, if you like that kind of traveling around stuff and living out of a suitcase and going to talk to people about, you know, mission-driven organizations and all of that stuff, you might like college admissions. And so he introduced me to that. And I thought, all right, so I'll do that for about 4 or 5 years. And that wound up being 13, you know. A lot of that was simply because every time I got a little bit bored, they kept throwing some other interesting things at me. Oh, you want to do international? Oh, you want to do admissions for higher education opportunity program? Oh, you want to liaise with other offices? You want to do some athletics? And it was just this kind of opportunity to learn and do a lot of different things. I loved it, but at the same time, I missed being in the classroom, which I had left as a full-time thing. I taught during the summertime, but I missed teaching, and I missed, you know, as admissions kind of continued to grow, I got farther and farther away from contact with students on a regular basis. And so that's when I started to look for other opportunities. Trinity was really interesting because it was familiar to me in terms of, you know, having gone to Catholic schools as well as independent schools. And so the kind of religiosity and basis of the school was interesting, opportunity to teach. And it just turned out to be a pretty good fit. And so I've been doing that for the last 7 years here. And I get to be in the classroom. I get to work with students on a regular basis. So, yeah. So that's my journey.
I love hearing what your professional journeys are that brought you either back to New York or to your particular school. As I mentioned earlier, I was a job fair candidate. That was 28 years ago. I thought that my path was going to be very clear and linear. Ha, was I wrong? I thought I was going to go to law school, and that was the vision that I had, and that didn't work out in terms of what was available to me in 1994 and the options. And somebody told me about this job fair, and I knew I had transferable skills because I had done admissions work. I had done work in the development and advancement office of my undergrad and of my first master's degree. And I'd done event planning, and there were all sorts of transferable skills that made sense for me to consider, because I was not going to be a teacher. I was not at all moving in that direction. Haha, famous last words. I ended up coming to the job fair and securing multiple interviews and ultimately several offers across a variety of different fields and roles in schools. And I ultimately ended up by accident in the classroom one day because somebody needed coverage in a high school class. And I tell you, it was magic. And so I can really understand what each of you says, you know, about who you get to connect with and the importance of being part of a community. I'd love for you all to think about, as I have just sort of spoken about some of the transferability of some of my experience, what have been some of the transferable skills that you've been able to apply to your role? And let's recognize that independent schools are different to higher ed and charter schools. And so when you think about and reflect on what are the transferable skills, feel free to highlight for our audience what are some of those differences from one to another and how you've been able to modify, adapt those skills. Tim, would love to hear from you first, and then Alec, Brenda, and then Elise.
Right, thank you. Transferable skills. So I transitioned to an admin role. So from a charter school, I will say some of the skills that I think sustain me every day is just time management, organizational skills, culture building, community building. At charter schools, there's a lot of meetings. The flow of meetings is very important. Agenda building is very important. Routinizing things is very important. Being extremely consistent is really important. And it's really helped me on a day-to-day basis, right? As an admin, I have a little bit more flexibility in my schedule, but I've been able to routinize the way I use my day to just maximize what gets done. Lesson planning. I loved lesson planning. It's probably one of my favorite things. And now I get to create sessions that our 3rd through 5th graders engage with around identity. And I get to work with teachers on that. Coaching, I got a wonderful opportunity to coach at my charter school. And so I get an opportunity to work with teachers. I'm in every language meeting. So I'm working with all the head teachers. I'm working with the learning specialist. They can present me with problems and I get to work with them and problem solving, but not just problem solving, like do this. It's like problem solving. Here's an example of something that I've used. Let's work with this, right? Let's engage with like different topics, different texts. So it's been really great to use resources that I've created in the past, work on refining resources that they have, getting a sense of like, what does a meeting seem like here, right? And then sort of picking out and being able to say, okay, well, if we wanted to increase just like the community oriented portion of meetings, like let's add this to the start or add this to the end. So yeah, and also scaffolding and differentiation, right? So I worked at a middle school. I worked with fifth graders a lot, but right now I'm in a K-5 school. So being able to scaffold and differentiate and knowing the different skills and ages that I work with has been really helpful. It's something that's really transferred well. It's like, how do we create accessibility for any type of text, right? We recently, I worked with third grade on just like finding options and endpoints for third graders for their personal narratives. Something that I was very comfortable doing because I was a writing teacher for seventh graders. So how do you get a child to feel comfortable enough to share part of themselves in writing? And what graphic organizers would help that, or what different types of that graphic organizer would help? Or what about a comic strip option, right? Like, so I was able to take literally the work that I did in the past and help transform that into an elementary age resource. Or I was able to plan alongside someone else. And I think that's been really rewarding. I also get to facilitate and be in front of kids. So I do get to those sessions that I plan, I get to facilitate and take on one of those affinity groups and be there and be present and get to know every child. And it's been a really wonderful 5 months of just like being able to pick apart my past 7 years of work and just sort of figure out where it fits in.
Thanks for all of that. So I'll go backwards and then forwards again. I would say that my career as a teacher really helped inform my career as a higher education admissions officer, right? All of the classroom preparation, the teaching, the ability to communicate with an individual kid as well as a classroom. Every single one of those skills were the things that I kind of stepped on to do my admissions work, right? So whether I was speaking to a small group, family, or an auditorium full of people, all of that came out of the classroom. I think my ability to communicate well to people, also came out of the classroom. And so I think being able to share stories with people, no matter their background, no matter where in the world that they're from, that for me, all of that came out of my teaching. And then learning the new role in terms of being a higher ed administrator, I think those things taught me everything from flexibility, communication, kind of strategic thinking and problem solving, right? When you're given responsibility for either a region or a project, there's just, the ability to bring so many different people and build trust, build some organizational thinking. I think I learned a lot of that at the university level, partner team building, really understanding difference, right? So, America's a big country as we've been learning these here few years. And so to be able to talk to different kinds of people, I think that certainly has informed my life now as an administrator working at a high school, and especially as a place with some really good diversity that Trinity has, being able to speak to kids and families regardless of the walk of life that they come from or the experiences that they've had before. I think my experience in admissions has certainly informed a lot of that, being able to speak people's language, so to speak, in terms of their wants and needs, and help to translate that into what's good and educationally sound for a kid, for a family, and look for pitfalls and issues like that might develop. I would say working at a university also taught me a lot about, kind of professional scope, right? Being able to understand your profession and how it fits within a larger educational mission. I think that was really important. And then leadership and just kind of like a broad vision of how to look at things. That I certainly use that now a lot in my role as a school counselor, because my role is not just working with students, but working with faculty, working with other administrators, working with just sort of having a broad school vision where K through 12, even though I work at the high school, I have to understand kind of like what's coming, in terms of what people see as their investment, their wants, their needs, and how to manage that, a lot of that going forward. I think all of those skills I learned at the university level, thinking not just as a teacher, but as a broad-based admissions professional. And then I try to use that here as well. But I would still say that it's my teaching that informs all of my relationships with people. And so I always draw back on that as well.
Thank you. So a lot of my skills are transferable. As a special education teacher, we are used to thinking about accommodations and modifications for students. And even though there aren't necessarily IEPs that we're working with, we're still able to look at those recommendations and think about what would be in the best interest of a child. So it took some getting used to reading through the neuropsych evaluations. However, it's definitely something that, or definitely the recommendations that we're used to, such as a student with attentional issues, they can benefit from preferential seating and limiting distractions. So definitely those things can carry over. And I also realized that my interactions with different curricula I've been able to transfer that knowledge over as well, such as I was trained in foundations. We use foundations at my school. I know about TC, Readers and Writers Workshop. We use that at my school. So those things are definitely, I can use that experience and bring it into my current role. Also, I've been working with children since the age of 14. So children are children, you know how to speak to children, and so it's not that different in that regard. What I really do love, though, is the fact that I can be creative and I can work with teachers and be collaborative. And that's something that I took from charter schools. I didn't have as much flexibility in public school, but when I went to charter, I had a lot more flexibility. And that's something that I definitely brought with me to the town school as well. And then just my ability to build relationships with families, with students. That's something that, that you bring with you, and that is really, really, it's really helpful having that experience that you can bring with you from a different environment.
Thank you, Brenda. I always love hearing your responses. There's so many moments where I'm like, yes, as you say something. So I appreciate that. And thinking about the skills that I probably transferred, I think it's twofold. In addition to working in Arlington Public Schools, I also worked for a group of charter schools, and I was an administrator at that point. And so I oversaw the learning support programs for 6 charter schools in DC. And I think by having the opportunity to do that, I worked with a lot of different people. And I also had to make sure that the people felt invested in the work that they did and that there was buy-in. And I think by being able to bring that skill into independent schools, because you do have people that come from schools where they've gone to school to learn how to teach, or maybe are experts in their field. So you do have to interact with every different background that's unique, and thinking about how you can kind of connect and collaborate so that it's in the best interest of the student. So I think that that was helpful. I also think the charter school day is long. My day often started at 7:30 and ended at 5 or 5:30. So there's stamina, and I had to be on, like, energy times 10 for that entire time. So then coming to a school where, the day is 8 to 3 or 2:30, and you have some more time in your day, like, that makes a difference as well. So I'm naturally energetic, but then coming into independent schools, I think everybody initially was like, whoa, like, how are you on 10 all the time? But it's just because I had to be. So I think that that was something that was really helpful. In thinking about the special education piece as a teacher, we were responsible in Arlington for having to do the educational evaluations and writing the report. So I was testing kids, creating their IEPs. And so I had experience in being able to do different kinds of testing, whether it be the WIAT or, the TOWEL for reading or writing, and, math assessments. So I was really able to look at the data firsthand and then use that to be considerate about when I was creating individualized IEPs or programs like that, so that students felt like, what I saw directly from their testing related to the accommodations and the different skill sets that I was trying to work towards. So that was helpful. So I think that, as Brenda mentioned, when you're reading neuropsych evaluations, having just that practice before, at least going in when I'm reading it, I can understand what the evaluator is saying. I can relate to it. I'm familiar with some of the tests and I can understand the scoring. So that's helpful. It also helps to inform how I explain that to a teacher so that they can understand how that might manifest in the classroom and what that looks like and how that might look different for a student who might have a similar learning profile but may need a different approach. So I think that's been helpful. I also had to co-teach. So I think there's always this misunderstanding sometimes about what a learning specialist does. There's a specialist attached to the name, so they just figure you know everything, which we do. No, maybe not. But the point is that, you know, we also have experience in being in the classroom with teachers. And one of the things I learned in grad school, but also in teaching, is that they wanted to make it so that they didn't know who was the general ed teacher and who was the special ed teacher. And so I always really appreciated that and kept that in mind so that anybody that came in the classroom wouldn't be able to tell, but that every student was getting some kind of differentiated instruction. So I think being able to create that situation and collaborate with my teachers when they're like, well, what do you know? You're not in the classroom. I can say, well, I actually used to be quite often, in addition to working with students one-on-one in small groups. So I'm on your team and I actually really make sure that it's important that you tell me what your expectations are, what rigor looks like, so that we're on the same page and I can have the same language so that the students are hearing the same message. And I think that when they hear that, that feels better for them and it maybe lessens any potential angst they have because I'm considered a learning specialist. And then they also see that our working together is really in the best interest of students, and so that they're able to progress at a natural pace. So I think that those transferable skills have definitely been helpful for me.
One of the things that really resonates for me that in some way you all have said is that there's work to be done everywhere, and that all kids benefit, of all identities benefit from adults and educators who care about them. And teachers benefit from people who are interested in collaborating and finding ways to support students, to meet them where they are and guide them along. I'm also really grateful to hear the experiences that you, Brenda, and Elise have had in particular in your roles in your transition to special education. It's important to note for anybody who's listening, we do have independent schools for students with a variety of learning styles and learning differences that are dedicated. And we also have learning centers, learning support departments within our schools that also provide support. So there's lots of opportunity for you to think about exactly what our panelists have just said, which is there's work to be done everywhere. If you're looking for a collaborative opportunity to really partner with adults who are interested in supporting young people of all identities, be able to see and understand their capacity and to support the school in what it means to live their mission as they meet the needs of kids. You know, there's great opportunities in independent schools. I'm really happy to let everyone know that we are just over 100 schools registered for Saturday, February 26th job fair, and it's still growing. So I'm super excited about what that means for anyone who comes to the job fair from the comfort of your own living room or wherever you might be. As we transition, you know, this is an open question. I'd love to hear what is the best advice you could offer yourself in your role today. So like, what would you, if you were today transitioning from charter to an independent school or higher ed to an independent school, what would be most helpful for you to best prepare for the job process? We all know looking for a job is a job in itself. And to, you know, enter the job fair and the job season. What would you want to tell yourself that might resonate for some of our audience members? Brenda, would love to hear from you, then Tim, then Alec, and then Elise, I have a special question for you. If you don't have anything in particular to add to anything anyone else has said.
Sure. My advice would be for myself is just remember that all independent schools are very different. You know, I went to Trinity School, which is very different from the town school. And so it's really important to do your research, to know each school really, really well. And also know that they may be in a space of transition. My role was new. I joined as the first 4th through 6th grade learning specialist. And so with that, there may come some ambiguity, or you may not be super sure exactly what it is that you are being asked to do, but you have the room to be creative and to explore. And that's what I really appreciate about my role, that no, it's not Trinity. It's not what I'm used to. However, I do have the opportunity to be creative and to bring my best self to work every single day. So that would be my real advice for anyone. Do your research and make sure that it's a good fit for you wherever you decide to go.
Thank you. I think I'd add, be open, and really pay attention to who you connect with. Right. I still remember my interview. I was actually interviewing for 2 different divisions, and the AP I currently work closely with, I remember that interview and connecting with them virtually and feeling like, wow, like there's this ability for us to communicate very seamlessly. And that's where I was excited. I didn't know what school I was going to end up at, but I was hoping I ended up where I did. And so just when you engage, ask a lot of questions, just as Brenda said, try to get a sense of what makes this a good fit for you, but also see the people who are in front of you and see how you relate to them, the energy that they give you, the energy that you feel like you're giving to them, and just, you know, wiggle around in there. And like when you find a spot that sticks, just be a little bit fearless about making sure you're asking those questions and engaging. Try not to back away from it or pull away from it, because it might feel weird.
You know, every time, Liz, you talk and mention that you were a job fair candidate, I always forget to mention, I too am a job fair candidate. I remember going to the job fair early in my career and getting at least 2 positions. And then, you know, I've sat on panels like this before, but yeah, the job fair has been good to me over the years. I think the advice that I would give is more of a remembrance and an understanding. You know, I just think I've been taught from my mom to just always be nice to everybody, right? Like there's never a reason to not be nice. And so where that turns into something that's professional is you have to be playing the long game in this sense. You're always being interviewed, right? The moment you walk into a building, you're being interviewed. Every interaction that you have with a kid, with a parent, the support staff, the security, you are always being looked at and judged in a lot of ways as to, you know, just how friendly you are, just how open and welcoming are you, right? You go to a conference, you're being interviewed, right? You meet people at other schools, you're being interviewed, right? That professional network that you develop, you're being interviewed, right? Because you could get a call, you know, you might not have been thinking about leaving, but somebody might tap you on the shoulder and be like, hey, I heard of this opportunity. And I think, you know, I've known you for a couple of years, or I've known you for a couple of months. I think you should apply for this. This is something that you might be a good fit for, right? So everything that Liz was saying before, in that there's always a job to do here. I think, Liz, you and I may have gotten that advice from the same person way back, right? And yeah, so there's no reason to judge why we're here. There's a job to be done here too, right? But just this idea that you are always being interviewed, right? And you, there's a lot of, you know, support that you need outside of these spaces to keep your head up and to be supported in the hard work that we do. But how we comport ourselves, how we treat other people, that's always being looked at, remembered. And, you know, you might get that call 20 years from now, 10 years from now, a couple months from now. So you're always on in some ways in these spaces. There's good and bad in that.
Thanks. So Elise, I said I had a special question for you because one of the things that I know is important, and so many of the participants who are listening and who are going to come to the job fair virtually are going to also be transitioning from one place to another. So for you, sort of the added reflection, in addition to what advice you would give yourself today, is there anything in particular as you think about a transition from one place to another that you think would be helpful for someone to hear? I mean, certainly in the last 2 years, between the global health pandemic and the systemic racism and racial reckoning that is unfolding for some more recently than for others, it's important to recognize that when you're moving cities, states, it's going to be different. And there are some challenges and great opportunities for that. And for some people, depending on the uncertainties of the moment, they may actually not physically walk into the school. Everything might be done virtually. So if you could reflect on that, what advice would you offer as you transition from one city to another, one state from another?
Thank you, Liz. That's a great question. I think the first thing I would say is give yourself grace. I have not had a typical school year yet at Trinity because I moved here back to New York in 2019, and then in March of 2020 we were inside, and I actually didn't go back to campus until April of 2021. So I got an advisory group that I didn't get to meet, and everyone was online. So that was definitely something that was unexpected. But the thing that helped me, and I think that this is really great advice, is to find your people. Find people that you can connect with, at least 1 or 2 people that you can really trust, that you can reflect or bounce ideas off of. I mean, you'll have those conversations with your colleagues just by the nature of your job, but having someone that knows you a little bit more, that's been at the institution, that can really speak to their experiences, perhaps someone, if possible, that you can affirm with, that can really talk even further about their personal experiences, I think is really helpful. But also to give yourself some time to recognize the differences. Georgetown Day School was such a different environment. I could hop into any department at any time and chat with the department chair in math or history or English. I mean, I'm at Trinity and I've been there for 3 years and plan to stay there for a little bit, but that was not the case when I started. And I remember going to POCC in Seattle, and we stayed in the same hotel with all of my former colleagues at Georgetown Day. And I just was like, this is such a different experience. Did I make the right decision? They're not as talkative as I am. Everyone kind of does their own thing. And it was easy to think that perhaps I didn't, but I had to give myself some time and learn about Trinity and the institution. But there were specific people, Alec being one of those people, because we work closely, that really helped me to kind of see and navigate Trinity, find ways where I could utilize my strength and shine my light. And so that was for me in affinity spaces, the Black Affairs Club, Young Women of Color, spaces like that. And I found that being able to step out of being a learning specialist and show more of who my true authentic self was to other colleagues and students helped make my transition that much more easy. But it's something that you have to really just give it time and learn. I mean, there's still parts of the building that I don't even know exist. I mean, last year I had to do turf duty, and I had to ask a couple of kids how to get up there. And I went up there and I'm like, how did I not even know that this existed all this time? I mean, so it happens, but I got lost going to the nurse. I mean, they relocated. I have to know that I'm human and these things happen, and that's the case. But I would say definitely that. And to circle back, Liz, to your original question, you're also interviewing the schools too. So even though they're asking you a lot of questions, just kind of how Brenda and Tim were saying, make sure you're asking questions for yourself too. Do you feel comfortable? What do they have to offer? Find out what their responses are, and make sure it's a good match. Not everything might line up, but if it can line up for the most part to where your values and morals stand in terms of how you see and your mission for education, then that's a good situation for you. But don't forget to do that. And I would definitely tell myself that I was so worried about what I look like, because I was coming from being a special education teacher K through 4 and interviewing for an upper school learning specialist at GDS. So I wondered if they thought I would connect or anything, but I knew that I had so many other transferable skills that could work. And I think it was just the fact that I was honest about the relationships that I made with students that really helped make that transition possible. So definitely don't forget to interview them as well.
I have to say that I'm just so appreciating these kernels of wisdom, and I really hope that our audience is really taking notes, because there's some, for real, there's some hashtag facts that you all are dropping that can be really helpful. And among them really is the idea of being confident in who you are and your value add. One of the things, and I've done a fair amount of hiring in my experience as a department chair and in my role as assistant head, et cetera. And one of the things that I always say is that if you're looking for a fit, then that's neat and easy, because you're looking for somebody to just blend into and be like everyone else. That's the fit. If you're looking for a value add, then that's where you can get creative. And each of you has that capacity, to think about your value add and your ability to be able to, in your confident ways, communicate the importance of relationships. Independent schools are really about relationships in so many ways because they're so much smaller. Our student to teacher ratio is significantly smaller. The ways in which we collaborate with one another, the creativity that we are able to come up with. I love Tim talking about the coaching and the co-teaching and the I'm a specialist and Alec, you're still in the classroom. So before I open it up to ask some of the questions that have come in through the live chat for those of you that are watching us live, I'm curious if Brenda and Alec could speak just from the perspective of the elephant that everybody wants to ask is, well, how do salaries and benefits compare? And that's real. I mean, we have to live and we have to provide for ourselves and for family members and friends that we've chosen to be family and so on and so forth. So I've asked Brenda and Alec to reflect, and then certainly Elise and Tim, if you have anything in addition to offer, that would be great. So Alec, I'd love for you to start, and then Brenda, you will go second, and then I'll ask Tim and Elise if you have anything to add. Meanwhile, everyone watching, send through the chat, send me questions. I'm happy to ask them.
So I'll start sort of going back to my early teaching days when, it was just salary was a conversation between you and the head of school, right? And so if you, and I was young, right? So if you are young and you've never held a job like that in an independent school, it's about that conversation. And I would just say any conversation like that, you need to be prepared, right? You need to do your research. You need to understand, what that particular marketplace is like, whether it be a boarding school, which was my first job, or a day school. By the time I was in my 6th, 7th year teaching, especially here in the city, most schools had started to adopt a pay scale, right? So certain number of years doing something equated to a certain number of steps, and that was your salary, right? Now, the secret behind that is, what do those steps mean? Does it mean full-time teaching, or are there other things that I can add to get me to that next step, right? So I did some summer teaching here, plus I did some coaching here. Ask the question, can I put that together as 1 year? Because you know what? I learned a lot and I did a lot that could equate to a full year full time, right? So be willing to, one, do your research, but two, ask questions, because, I would say as independent schools can be very generous, right? And they can be very wealthy. They're also cheap too, right? Like if they can get you for less than what what they think you might be worth, sure, right? They'll put that money back into the coffer or pass it on to somebody else. So do your research, be willing to have conversations, talk about, and this was something that I remember from my early days, right? So there are all these other duties, right, that you want to do and you're asked to do to get more and more involved in the community. Do these come with a little bit of extra? Because you know what, you're charging people for all of these extra things, and should I get a little bit of that because I have to live, I have to, I'm putting in this time, this energy, and this work. So ask those questions, do that research, understand what a pay scale is at the school and who benefits from it, who's it for. If you're looking at an administrative role, it's different, right? So there won't be a pay scale in that sense, but this is where you have to do the broader research of what does a position like this look like at competing schools, right? So if this is the average, you need to, when you get that offer, they've got a range in mind, have that conversation about the range versus if you don't know what other people in your similar role at other schools or maybe even at your school, what they're making, you can lowball yourself and you don't want to do that, right? So do your research. I think don't go into any interview cold, not knowing anything about. So talk to as many people as you can, right? Hopefully, maybe you have a mentor, or if you're at the job fair, do you all know anything about what salary and benefits are like at this school, right? Or that school or this school. So that's just salary piece, right? The benefits piece. Usually you should be able to read about that because that can be a little bit universal in the sense of everyone gets healthcare, everyone gets vision, and everyone. But are there special circumstances that might change your benefits versus somebody else's? And so be able to be open. During, I would say, if it's a negotiation where you're being offered a job, talk about your circumstances and talk about whether or not. Can I talk to the HR person if you're not comfortable with talking to a department head or a principal, but talk to the HR person. Are there any benefits that I might be able to get based on my different circumstances? And the thing that I will get, everybody asks for something at in spaces like ours. And so you can't go about it thinking that maybe it's too embarrassing or I'm going to lose an offer because I'm asking for compensation. Don't do that to yourselves either, right? So I would just say, do your research, have as many conversations as you can, compare notes among other people at other places who are also going through similar searches, try to know and understand the journey that other people held, right? What were you making at the beginning of your career? And, is this an institution that, grades you up a little bit based on some of the responsibilities that you might have, right? So be curious, right? And when you're talking about salary and benefits and things like that, be curious enough to ask questions and just say like, hey, I'm just trying to understand, right? What this environment is like. Curiosity goes a long way. So, sorry, Brenda, go ahead.
I really appreciate what you said, Alec, about all of these add-ons, because it's true. There are stipends that are given out, summer grants for work, after school homework help, students of color affinity group, I received a stipend. So there definitely are add-ons that you should think about as you're going into these spaces that, in a charter school, you're not going to necessarily get a stipend for homework help, but you can at an independent school, certainly. Also, I'll say negotiate, especially as women of color. I don't think we do that enough. And I went into negotiation saying, okay, this is the DOE pay scale. This is what I would be making as a DOE teacher. Can you match this? And they were able to. So definitely think about what you can bring to the table to help support your case for why you feel like you should be making a certain amount of money, for sure.
Can I add one more thing to the negotiation piece? Because I think that's really important. Even if they say no right now, plant the seed and be ready, willing, and able to say, okay, so we'll come back and revisit that at a later point when we're talking about, so I asked for this and okay, it wasn't in this year's budget. Okay, I understand that. Can we table this to next year when we're renegotiating our contract, and revisit that conversation so that they remember to put what it is that you had asked for in the budget for next year and follow up. Don't forget, because if you don't stay on top of people when it comes to your salary and benefits, they're going to assume that, oh, you're happy with what it is that you're getting and making. And not to say that you shouldn't be, but you know, it's America.
Anything to briefly add, Tim and Elise? Great. Okay. So here's the summary, because salaries and benefits is something that I get asked all the time as the person who organizes the job fair. And when people say do your research, if you don't know what that means, ask me. Please reach out. I am happy to help and support. I love the example, Brenda, that you gave of you knew what you would be making at the DOE. You had the scale. So you could have that conversation when you were sitting at the table. I love what you said, Alec, about, you know, be mindful, make note, and come back to. I'm sure some of you have seen the know your value and worth and then add tax on top of that. So I certainly encourage you to think about that. Your resume really needs to ensure that it has all the interactions with young people that you've had in your lifetime, because those things begin to count. That's what Alec was talking about. So you were a camp counselor, you were in a youth group, you had a leadership position in your house of worship, you have done some childcare, it all counts. Look for ways to also increase your salary through those stipends. Early care, after school care, chaperone responsibilities, club advising, coaching. Let's also recognize independent schools are extraordinarily generous with professional development funds. There's both what happens in the school that is designated as those PD days or in-service days or professional development days. And then there's additional funding that is offered to support you in developing an idea or a collaboration or a transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary project or something along those lines. So there are those. And then I'm going to just make this very, very compare apples to apples. Independent schools are in school fewer days in a calendar year than certainly charter and public schools. Higher ed might be a little bit different. As such, you've got smaller classes, you've got fewer days in the year, and you've got support. Most of the independent schools are offering some sort of meal, maybe one or two, maybe it's breakfast, maybe it's lunch. So there are additional benefits to think about, and more vacation time as well. And when you start to do those comparisons, it behooves you to really think about, are you really getting paid more at a charter or at a public school or not? It's just something to think about. And with that, I want to thank Elise and Tim and Brenda and Alec for your time, for sharing your experiences and your wisdom with everyone. I want to recognize Marcy behind the scenes from NYSAIS, providing us with tech support, everyone that's joined live, everyone that is viewing this after. If there's any way we can be helpful, by all means, please email jobfair@nysais.org, Saturday, February 26th, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. virtually through a brazen platform. Registration is always free to candidates. We welcome everyone to attend. Please, please do not wait till right before the job fair to register. Schools are going to get access to resumes early next week. So you want to be already in the queue, ready for people to start reviewing. Any questions? Don't hesitate to reach out. Friends, colleagues, I wish you all the very best. Thank you for your time and the gift of your company. And good luck to everybody. Have a great evening. Stay safe and stay hopeful, everyone.
Hi, thank